Hello guys, hope you guys are doing well. In today's video we are gonna be doing another part of Dragon of Domination. Let's start fanfiction just in community forum more The Dragon of Domination by A Task of Darkness anime, High School DxD, Haisuku Ru D times D rated. M. English, H. Issei. Rias G. Gabriel. Graphia L. Words. 50k plus. Faves. 3k plus. Follows. 4k plus. Published. February 21, 2019 updated. August 21, 2021 711 Chapter 10 Issei couldn't help but feel a bit of a loss as he left his room, leaving Asia alone, collapsed on the bed, reeling from the effects of his skillful tongue, naked as the day she was born. It might be her sense of abandonment forcing her to lean on the first one that supported her, or it might be the devil transformation that might be transforming her mentality. Issei was glad for it in any case. The first few days of his life as a devil had gone better than he expected. Rias, his supposed king, was much easier to manipulate than he had assumed, making his attempts of subverting her rule fun. He still had to be careful, of course, as Rias was hardly the most dangerous Grimoire. No, that honor went to his brother who had abandoned his family name to take the title of Lucifer, famous as the strongest devil. As much as Issei wanted to test himself against him, he knew it was too early for something like that. Luckily, there were a lot of things for him to dally while he got stronger, two of them he had already acquainted in detail. And with Rias and Asia have already taken the first real steps under his dominion, it was time for Akeno to join the fray. He needed to visit the training arena where Akeno was waiting for him, but he decided to take a small detour to the armory. There, he picked a couple of armor pieces, a stylish chainmail, and an imposing gauntlet to his left hand that wouldn't look too bad with his boosted gear. It was more about the style and to convey the seriousness of the situation to Akeno rather than their protection value, as his skin was much harder than any armor that they had laying around. After completing his new gear, he was at the underground training area underneath the club. "You're late, Issei-kun," Akeno said in a tone that might have been mistaken for calm, if it wasn't for his enhanced dragonic senses catching her annoyance. Still, he was happy to hear that, as it would make it even more satisfying when he finally pushed her down to take her. The way she was dressed was even better than the promise of satisfaction. She was wearing a modified shrine maiden outfit that hugged her body perfectly, displaying every single curve she had without shame, with a cleavage deep enough to reveal the color of her bra, which was purple. Also, her outfit was short enough that her every movement carried to the risk of flashing him. Even better was the seductive expression on her face, enough to stir his desire, her hidden annoyance just enhancing it more. Her careful selection of attire was clearly had ulterior motives, once again trying to quicken the awakening of his devil powers through the sin of lust despite its potential to harm him if he had been as weak as he was playing to be. "Sorry, Akeno-chan," he said with an insincere tone, something Akeno caught easily if the sudden tightening of her smile was any indicator. "I had to help Asia-chan before leaving. It would have been rude to cut my help halfway. She needs to acclimate herself to the life of a devil." "Are you trying to make me jealous, Issei-kun?" Akeno countered, trying to sound teasing, but that was only paper thin, hiding the heat of her anger underneath. Issei had a feeling that it was more about him being late than actually anything about Asia. Still, he enjoyed the way Akeno displayed her cleavage as she teased him. "I don't know what you mean, Akeno-chan. I'm helping her just the way you and Bucho had helped me. Is it somehow unusual?" Issei answered with a smirk, letting his eyes drag over her body to remind her that she had been forced to serve as a common stripper at her king's request just to speed up the development of his devil powers, poking at her pride unashamedly. Akeno chose not to answer, instead of waving her hand, making a bunch of targets appear on her field of view. "Today we're going to work on your magic skills," she explained, her calm exterior trembling for a moment, unhappy with his reminders. "First we're going to work on materializing mana, then we're going to move on to target practice." Then, she smirked in a way that showed she might have certain ideas for the training. "However, just to make sure you're paying attention to the training, I'm going to give a small shock to you every time you miss a shot," she continued, lightning crackling between her fingers. "Really, Akeno-chan? Wouldn't it hurt?" Issei said, but this time, he wasn't bothering to maintain his idiot persona, aware that their little game was about to come to an end. Under the circumstances, it was better to keep Akano focused on him rather than her keeping a calm mind and discussing things with Rias. He still needed some time before Ria's situation could be revealed to the rest of her peerage. Akano giggled. It wasn't a cute, playful giggle. Instead, it was one that hinted that her reputation as the sadist queen wasn't an empty title. Maybe a bit, but I'm sure a strong man like you can handle without an issue, Issei-kun. Maybe I can, Issei answered. But that doesn't mean that I will, he added, but continued before she could cut in, unless there's something really interesting on the table, of course. Of course, Akano answered with a smirk, amused at his presumption. From her gaze, Issei could read that she was already convinced of his failure. After all, he was just a new devil, far above the situation. What do you have in mind, Issei-kun? We should go for something simple. How about you lose a piece of clothing whenever I hit a target? Akano frowned a bit at his offer, aware of his high likelihood of accuracy. After all, targets weren't exactly small. Then, her eyes grew as she subtly waved her hand in a way that she thought as hidden. With his magical perception, Issei could see that she had established a repelling field in front of each target, one that would deflect his spells, preventing them from hitting the target. Not a bad idea, Issei-kun, but a target is too big. How about we limit it to the bullseye? Only if I got to add another condition, Issei answered. Akano nodded, and he continued. Anything that gets removed stays that way until the end of the training session, including the sparring. You want to spar with little poor naked Akano-chan, then, she answered with a mock despondence as she leaned forward and pushed her arms together, enhancing her cleavage further. What did I deserve to gain such a merciless student, trying to hurt his teacher in the first lesson? Don't worry Akano-chan, I'll make sure that you enjoy it, Issei said confidently with a wink, making Akano even angrier. But it was better for him, angrier she was, the longer she would last. With one final nod, she launched a small tutorial on how to externalize his magical prowess, and she even taught him a small lightning attack. Issei nodded in hidden appreciation on her trick, as lightning was not only hard to control, making it a poor selection for target practice, but also it would have been affected by her lightning-natured repelling fields excessively, making it impossible for it to meet with the target. Too bad for her that Issei was already capable of magic. After around 5 minutes of training, Akano decided to cut it short. That's enough theory, Issei-kun, Akano said with a giggle. Why don't you try to conjure a ball of mana? Issei decided to struggle a bit at first, mostly to make her even more confident about the bet before he pulled the rug underneath her. The first ball of mana he conjured was a small, pitiful thing, barely able to stay alive under its own power. Come on, Issei-kun, try a bit. You know what they say about guys with small mana, she said mockingly. How about if you give me a little incentive like you did while trying to help me conjure my sacred gear, Issei said. Such a naughty boy, Akano gasped excessively as she brought her arm on her lips, her other hand on her leg. What do you have in mind? Issei said nothing, just reached forward and grabbed her breast mercilessly, his fingers sinking into her flesh easily. Her eyes flashed in anger at his presumption, her hand sparkling with lightning, but she managed to hold herself back, still trying to play a role. Just as Akano opened her mouth, ready to remove his hand, he let his magic free, and a crimson ball of energy, with occasional bolts of lightning dancing on the surface, appeared, floating above his palm, too dense to belong a novice. Under any other situation, such a display would have revealed his play as the human unaware of the supernatural, but luckily, boosted gear and the boost from his sin of lust was enough to explain the phenomenon. Even if Akano felt suspicious, it wouldn't really matter in a few days. How about this one, Akano-chan? He asked with a smirk even as he kept squeezing her breasts repeatedly. When her eyes got stuck on his proto-spell, he decided to use her distraction to a better benefit, and slipped his hand into her cleavage, mauling her tits over her bra, its thin fabric barely isolating her skin from his. Not bad, Issei-kun, Akano answered, still fascinated by the way crimson lightning was dancing threateningly on its surface. Issei used the opportunity to push his luck more, and pulled her bra to the side, and started massaging her naked tits skillfully. Only after a gasp escaped her mouth Akano realized the liberties he was taking. That's enough, Issei-kun, she said as she took a step back, giving him a glimpse of her naked breast before quickly fixing it. Let's see whether you'll be able to hit your target, she said quickly, occupied by her lapse of attention. Issei smirked at the way she was cheating, not allowing him to master the lightning spell before trying to hit the targets. He decided to play along, and cast his first spell badly, letting it fizzle out of existence halfway. Too bad, Issei-kun, Akeno said as she blasted him with a bolt of lightning. Ouch, careful, Issei said, making a show of being hurt. Akeno wasn't holding back much, the amount she had used would have left a new devil twitching on the floor. Come on, Issei-kun, Akeno said as she put her hand on his shoulder flirtatiously. You're the holder of the boosted gear, don't tell me you can't handle a weak bolt of lightning. Issei just smirked before casting the spell once more, this time reaching the target, but bounced to the side by Akeno's deflection field. Akeno hit him with another lightning bolt, several times stronger than the previous one. You're really pushing your luck, Akeno-chan, Issei said as he smiled at her darkly. If the previous one would have damaged a new devil, this one would have killed the said devil instantly. Surely not, Issei-kun, Akeno said with a fake smile, but he could see hints of suspicion underneath. His lack of reaction to her attack was simply too mild, especially considering he didn't have the boosted gear out. Luckily, it was just a groundless suspicion for the moment. Issei decided to give her a more immediate problem. He conjured the lightning once more, this time several times stronger than before, and sent it forward, creating a crater in the middle of the target. Bullseye, he said as he took a step to Akeno, and put his hand on her shrine maiden outfit. What are you doing, Issei-kun? Akeno murmured. Getting the fruits of my victory, Issei said. Akeno looked annoyed at his presumption, but she was under orders, so she had to swallow her dissatisfaction. Don't you want to watch me undress slowly, Issei-kun, she murmured playfully, but Issei could see that it was an attempt to maintain control. Nope, Issei answered as he tugged her outfit, ripping it violently, leaving her in her underwear. Such a naughty boy, Akeno giggled, trying to hide her discomfort, more due to her sudden loss of control than the fact that she was in her underwear. After all, it wasn't the first time she was revealing her delicious curves to his sight. Issei cast another spell, missing once again. You need to work on your aim, Akeno said as she raised her hand, her smile displaying her full sadism without bothering to hide. Before she could blast, Issei conjured his boosted gear, not because he needed its assistance to resist her overpowered attack, but to have an excuse about his lack of wounds. Akeno giggled as she blasted him with an extended lightning bolt, the intensity increasing in each second. It was far from her full power, but still, considering she was already a high-class devil, it didn't mean a lot. Issei was glad to have his power, because Akeno was as crazy as she was sexy. Dealing with her without his powers would have been a nightmare. When she finally stopped, she saw his untouched visage. How? She murmured, shocked. Issei just waved his gauntleted hand in response. That's cheating, she murmured. Issei just smirked before conjuring another lightning spell, once again hitting his target. This time, before he could take a step to her, she quickly removed one of her sandals. A piece of clothing, just as promised, she said, her smile smug. Issei let her enjoy her momentarily victory before casting another spell, destroying yet another target. Akeno removed her other sandal. With a smirk, Issei hit 2 targets in a row. It's easier than I would have assumed, he said smugly as he closed in the distance once more, one hand on her panties, the other on her bra, both falling on the floor in pieces after he pulled them violently, revealing her naked visage for his sight. Do you want to continue with the target practice, Akeno-chan? Issei said smugly as he examined her body without shame, his bulge visible. Though, we might need to strike a new bargain considering your state of dress. No, we can move to spar, Akeno said, not bothering to hide her visage as she walked toward the center of the stage, her beautiful assets jiggling with each angry step. We need to make sure that you can hold yourself in a fight. Of course, Issei said as he walked closer, the boosted gear still prominently displayed on his arm. Akeno looked at it with dissatisfaction, but not worry, clearly assuming that her queen amplifications would be sufficient to dominate him. It was a dangerous assumption. Are you sure you want to do this? Akeno said mockingly, more to goad him to act than any concern about his well-being. There's no shame in admitting that you're weaker than a poor little girl like me, she added, trying to goad his pride, and through the way she jiggled her tits, lust as well, making sure he wouldn't surrender easily. Nope. I'm ready to go, Issei said, taking a step forward and raised his arm. But how about we make it a bit more interesting, he added. I'm insulted that you don't find a spar with this poor girl interesting enough, Akano said with a giggle as she pointed at her naked body, her every curve sculpted to perfection to give a sense of feminine allure, begging Issei to push forward and take her down. You're beautiful, Akano-chan, Issei said. But I'm thinking that stopping after pinning you on the floor, helpless, would have been such a pity. So, I'm thinking that we continue no matter what until someone admits defeat. He smirked as he let his eyes focus on the treasure between her legs. No matter what, he repeated. Oh, ambitious, Akano laughed derisively, fully expecting to win and insulted by him thinking that he had a chance of victory. But if we're going to do that, I want something better. The winner wins one night, from dawn till dusk, with no restriction on the requests. If you are willing to be my plaything for a full evening, who was I to disagree, Issei countered, gesturing her to start. Fanfiction just in community forum More the Dragon of Domination by Attached of Darkness Anime, High School DxD, Haisuku Ru D times D rated. M. English, H. Issei. Rias G. Gabriel. Graphia L. Words. 50k plus. Faves. 3k plus. Follows. 4k plus. Published. February 21, 2019 updated. August 21, 2021 711 Chapter 11 As she watched Issei block yet another lightning blast easily with a rudimentary shield while ogling her naked body, Akano was starting to think that maybe she had overplayed her hand. Self-doubt wasn't something foreign to her, but it was usually about her angst on her lineage, or occasionally about her helplessness against the challenge Rias was facing. She hadn't been expecting the new pawn of their peerage to be the source of the problem, at least not the way he had been doing. When Rias first came to the decision of inviting him to the peerage, Akano wanted to argue against, not seeing any value in a pathetic, spineless pervert with a mysterious sacred gear, even if all the indicators showed that it was one of the stronger ones. However, Akano didn't argue much, knowing the only reason Rias was actually considering was that she was woefully unprepared for her upcoming engagement. Even then, they were planning to be more careful when a bunch of Fallen decided to join the party by targeting Issei for the same sacred gear, quickening their timetable even more. It was more underhanded than Rias preferred, but it was actually Akano that convinced her that making sure to take him in was more important than his consent. Worst came to worst, Rias could always get rid of him after the engagement issue was solved one way or another. Not like they were facing an abundance of options, not with Fennec's family making sure to prevent Rias from getting decent peerage members, something Ria's parents were actually allowing, while her brother was helpless due to forced neutrality. So, they recruited Issei without knowing his true potential, very reluctantly. Akano let herself feel hope when she learned that it took 8 pawn pieces to actually resurrect Issei, hinting that his potential was above their expectations. However, even in her wildest dreams, Akano didn't expect Issei to actually have boosted gear, one of the 17 proclaimed Godslayer sacred gears. For the first time in months, Akano let herself feel hope. Of course, even with the boosted gear, Issei was a weakling, a baseline human with no hint of the strength of magic. Rias was planning to act more conservatively, but once again, it was Akano who convinced Rias that more drastic measures were required, such as forcibly quickening the assembly of his devil powers. Rias felt guilty, knowing the possibility of permanently destroying Issei's future, but with the looming nightmare of Riser Fennecs, it hadn't been hard to convince her. Their strategy had certain drawbacks, in the particular necessity to tap into Issei's sins, and since he was a raging pervert with no other discernible trait, lust was the obvious choice to focus. Of course, Akano would have preferred to hire several devil escorts and wash her hands completely, but a leak about Issei would have forced Fennecs to act faster, with disastrous consequences. Kaneko was out simply because it was impossible to use her in such a scheme, leaving Akano and Rias to handle it. Rias tried to handle it first, but soon, she asked Akano's help, admitting that she wasn't able to handle it. Though she didn't give any reason, Akano was sure that it was because Rias was feeling guilty about Issei's fate. Akano didn't feel bitter about the fact that she had to whore herself for Rias' sake. Rias was her everything, and she would be willing to do much more than that for her. However, Issei's annoying weakling personality irked Akano wrong from the beginning, making her wish that flat-out dominating him mercilessly was applicable, possibly with a liberal application of torture. Sex was sex, right? In the end, Akeno was forced to play nice despite how annoying she found Issei. However, that was before today's training. Akeno didn't know why. Though suspected that it was about his new blonde girlfriend, but Issei was acting much more confidently today, with a smile that begged Akeno to smash him to pieces. Pity that they needed to shore his confidence as well during his training, forcing Akeno to wear a mask. The training itself was even more fascinating. Akeno wasn't expecting Issei to achieve anything more than a flickering ball of mana at the end of their session, so his learning speed and accuracy caught her flat-footed, unfortunately costing her all of her clothes, leaving her in her birthday suit. Still, it was nothing compared to the impressive reflexes he was showing against her lightning attacks, dodging what he could and blocking the rest. He still received some damage, of course, but it was nothing spectacular. She should have been feeling happy that he was showing such an impressive combat ability, but with an actual humiliating bet on the line, Akeno couldn't help but feel despondent. She had tried to take him down at the beginning, both to teach him a lesson and to vent her anger, but since she didn't know his resistance and didn't want to kill him, she started slow. By the time she realized the problem, he had already used boosted gear to increase his capabilities significantly, making it impossible for Akeno to defeat him unless she went reasonably close to an all-out assault. And she doubted Rias would appreciate permanently damaging him just because Akeno was idiotic enough to agree to a bet. A bet that actually helped them to forward their plan, even. Come on, Akeno-chan, is this all you can do? Issei mocked her, even gesturing her to come closer, like he had a semblance of hope actually resisting her full strength. But Akeno was an angry girl, so she decided to ignore the risk for a moment. Enough! She cried in anger and sent an impressive bolt of lightning toward him, far faster than the previous ones, hitting him before he could even react. Akeno was ready to dash forward, to apply first aid to make sure he wasn't dead or permanently crippled, so she was pretty surprised when rather than collapsing, Issei dashed toward her, especially when she wasn't even able to react to his speed before his gauntleted hand ended around her throat, squeezing hard enough to cut her breathing. And before she could say anything else, she found herself smashed against the reinforced walls of the training area, hard enough to actually crack it. So, Akeno-chan, he drawled. I guess that's my win. Akeno felt tongue-tied, and not because she actually lost a pawn with less than a week of combat experience. Well, at least not entirely because of it. No, Akeno was shocked at Issei's demeanor. Gone was the simpering pervert that would humiliate himself any way Akeno desired just to get a glimpse of her panties, replaced by an unfathomable being that radiated pressure. She didn't know whether it was the boosted gear that was making him like that, or he was finally tapping into his inner manhood after painful combat, but regardless, the gauntlet around her neck wasn't the only reason she was having trouble breathing. Issei-kun. She managed to gasp. Did you say something? Akeno-chan, he answered, acting like he didn't hear her, but it wasn't as impressive as the tightening around her neck. She suddenly felt herself forced to rise, her feet dangling in the air. It wasn't really dangerous thanks to her queen resistance, but it was still uncomfortable. More importantly, the message was clear. Akeno had always prided herself in her ability to maintain control since the day she became a part of Ria's family and abandoning her roots. She was calm, collected, and if necessary, explosively sadist and controlling, but never submissive. Even against her king, she showed loyalty enough to give her life, but never submissive deference. Which was why it was surprising when she suddenly found herself frozen in his grasp, unable to raise a hand to blast him away. She tried to force her hand, but it only took a pointed glare from him for her hand to stay frozen, leaving Akeno in a daze trying to understand what was going on. His presence was nothing she felt before, suffocating her completely. She tried to say something, but with his grip around her throat, all that left her throat was an indecipherable gasp. Are you trying to say something, Akeno-chan? Issei said mockingly, but the undertone of it was much darker than sheer amusement. Akeno nodded helplessly, and Issei loosened his grip, enough to allow her to speak. I admit defeat, Issei-kun, Akeno said, trying to sound cheerful, but very much aware of the fragility of her voice. She was feeling things she never felt before, and it was making her confused. Now, can you please let me go? And why would I do that? he countered, his smirk in place. Because I don't like this, she rapidly answered, even though those words left her mouth rather hard for some reason. Oh really? Are you sure about that? Issei said, once again radiating that damnable confidence. Akano nodded, ignoring the sudden burst of doubt she felt, afraid of its implications. Issei said nothing for a moment, but his free hand reached to her cheek, his caress leaving an imaginary burning sensation after a fleeting touch, making her gasp. When his hand slowly dragged lower, it also destroyed any hope of her calming down. His finger dragged down her neck first, then past the valley between her breasts. Akano bit her lip, determined not to admit what was going on, even in the confines of her mind. She wasn't this weak. She wasn't. No matter how much she wished his hand to stay on her breasts and dig mercilessly. Issei continued, caressing her stomach with the same tortuous slowness before finally arriving between her legs, caressing her nether lips. When he brought his hand up once more, his fingers were glistening with her juices. She was unprepared for him to stuff his fingers into her mouth, forcing her to taste herself. Tell me again, Akano-chan, are you really not enjoying this? I don't. I'm a sadist. I'm the dominant one, she murmured helplessly, and then, without prompting, she added. I can't. And why is that, Akano-chan? Issei asked, but despite everything, Akano kept her mouth shut. Even under those circumstances, she had no intention of spilling her secrets. Seeing her confident expression, he sighed. As you wish, Akano-chan, he said, once again dismissive, like he was talking about the weather. However, as a friend, I would be remiss if I didn't help you connect with your real desires. How? She stammered reflexively, but even as she asked, she knew that it was a mistake. Issei just grinned before loosening his grip around her throat, but before she could react, he forced her to turn so that her chest was pressed against the wall. At the same moment, she felt a distinctive, cylindrical object pressing against her entrance. Her back door entrance. Issei. No, don't you dare, she started, only to feel an absolutely humongous fleshy appendage to force itself into her puckered hole mercilessly, enough to make Akano gasp in pain despite her resistance. Damn, a-chan, you're tight, Issei grunted in appreciation even as his shaft moved deeper into the untouched depths of her puckered hole. Under a combined assault of pain and shock, Akano did nothing other standing still, her mind too clogged to process just how things had come to that point. And as Issei's shaft moved deeper and deeper, it was getting harder to process. Pull back, Issei-kun, please, she managed to murmur in her haze. However, when he actually followed her request and pulled back, she was struck with a sense of loss and emptiness, feeling like she had committed a big mistake. Which was why when Issei pushed into her again, she was unprepared for the rush of pleasure that accompanied it, and a moan escaped her mouth. Just as I guessed, Akano-chan. For all of your bluster being a sadist and dominant, you're nothing more than a submissive bitch, Issei whispered into her ear even as he started impaling her with a merciless rhythm. Akano would have liked to argue, but with her body's betrayal, it was impossible to actually speak. The pain was expected, but the accompanying pleasure, getting more with each beat, was not. Akano was in a daze as she turned her head, trying to catch his lips, but failed when Issei pulled back. Please, Issei-kun, she moaned, her earlier resistance long forgotten. No kisses for submissive bitches, Akano-chan, he whispered even as his lips lingered just an inch away from hers, so close yet too far away. For a moment, Akano was struck with a sensation of yearning and loss, desiring his lips over hers mercilessly, like he was staking his ownership, lamenting the fact that it wouldn't happen. Then, Issei continued. Not before they earn it, at least. When he followed his words with another merciless push of his hips, invading even deeper into her bowels, Akano couldn't help but gasp under a fresh wave of pleasure, threatening to drown her. Even then, she was doing her best to understand the implications of his words, that even when he was taking her anal virginity, he wanted more from her, in a way to prove her devotion. It would never happen, she thought sharply. She would never degrade herself to willingly try to earn his favor, just to get a measly little kiss. She was the lightning queen, the sadist, the strongest person after Rias in their peerage. Why should she be inferior to a measly little pawn, even if that pawn had the boosted gear, with the potential to reach ultimate class? Of course, The voice back in her head tried to remind her that she was currently leaning against the wall obediently while he used her asshole mercilessly, beat after beat, uncaring of the pain and the pleasure he caused, but Akino ignored that voice steadfastly. She wasn't a submissive. She just wasn't. The voice asked her why she was standing there. Obediently if she wasn't submissive, and the answer came just as quick. She was just helping Issei to get connected to his lust better, to make him stronger. The fact that she had no intention of letting him penetrate her was immaterial. She just saw an opportunity, and she took it. It was all for Ria's sake. For Ria's sake. So, when she started to push her hips outward to match his beats, she felt relaxed. She was doing her job as the queen, helping Rias to avoid her fate. And if she was selflessly helping her king to avoid her fate, what was the harm if she felt some pleasure at the moment? Thinking like that, she almost convinced herself that she was doing the altruistic thing by pushing her hips outward, filling the training room with the sound of flesh hitting flesh, giving her a fresh jolt of pleasure with each repeat. Good girl, he whispered, which had no effect on Akino. Definitely no effect. She didn't shudder with sudden joy. Her hole didn't suddenly get tighter. And most definitely, she didn't explode with a sudden climax that hit her stronger than a freight train, turning her legs into a puddle, with the only thing that left her standing was Issei's pole stabbed in her bottom, keeping her upright. She just had a sudden bout of dizziness because of her low blood sugar, completely normal for a devil in perfect condition. Since Issei was a rude bastard, he had shown no respect to her sudden onset of dizziness, continuing to slam into her back door again and again. Akino tried to tell him to stop. Well, she moaned and cried, but that was essentially the same thing, and the way her hips moved was definitely not from a desire for more. She didn't know how long she stood there, smashed against the wall, used as a doll, but the ending was all too memorable. She felt his cock twitching inside her mercilessly in a warning before a flood invaded her bowels as he started spurting his seed, pump after pump until she started to feel bloated. Another sudden bout of dizziness struck her, once again definitely not from an orgasm, her legs trembling, but this time, Issei pulled back without a warning. Akino wasn't prepared for that, so she collapsed on the ground, far too aware of the way his seed seeped out of her puckered hole. She hated the way excitement filled her heart as she tried to imagine what Issei would do next, trying to combat her daze. Seconds passed with no contact. Then, she was shocked by the sound of the door slamming close. Akino raised her head, only to see Issei gone, leaving her alone in the training room, abused and used. She never hated anyone as much as she hated him at that moment. How dare he use her like a toy, and how dare he could leave her like that? Anger filled her heart. Anger was good, Akino decided, because it pushed her confusing feelings away. She stood up with vengeance, walking toward her clothes. A part of her wanted to go talk with Rias, but she decided not to. Rias had enough problems without thinking about the implications of her request on Akino. Her friend deserved better. Akino could handle the confusing situation on her own. And if she skipped showering, it was definitely not about keeping Issei's smell on her body a little more. Definitely not. Fanfiction just in community forum More the Dragon of Domination by A Task of Darkness Anime, High School DxD, Haisuku Ru D times D rated. M. English, H. Issei. Rias G. Gabriel. Graphia L. Words. 50k plus. Faves. 3k plus. Follows. 4k plus. Published. February 21, 2019 updated. August 21, 2021 711 Chapter 12 Issei was feeling smug as he left Akino behind in the training room, enjoying the opportunity of finally teaching Akino about her true place under him. Her superior attitude and her claim for dominance had been grating his nerves even worse than the metaphorical chains Rias had placed upon him, not that breaking them would have been terribly difficult. The peerage system was designed to convert weak candidates with potential, not a powerhouse with the awakened energy of a heavenly dragon like him. A burst of power was all it would take to destroy those chains. Not that he wanted to do it, of course. Not only his transformation to a devil was extremely useful, expanding his powers greatly, but also he was exactly where he wanted, under the unknowing concealment of two Satans, ready to take the future by the horns. Drake bitched about the need for concealment, of course, but considering his direct and confrontational ways had ended up when the god stuffed his soul into a sacred gear, Issei wasn't inclined to follow that particular advice. He didn't have a particular location to visit, so he was walking aimlessly when he heard his name. Issei! Rias shouted, her voice loud enough to reach him from a closed door. Very curious, Issei decided, especially if he managed to read the husky tone of shout correctly. He walked toward the door, smiling widely as he listened the gasps coming from inside. Apparently, his earlier treatment had left an impression. The door was locked magically, but Issei dispelled it with a wave of his hand. I'm coming, Bucho, he shouted back, warning her as he opened the door. He could have busted her directly, but watching her scramble promised to be more amusing, not to mention he wanted to listen to the absurd excuses of his new king. When Issei burst in, Rias was frantically pulling the covers on her, giving him a glimpse of her beautiful body before it disappeared under her white covers. Pity, Issei decided. Issei-kun, Rias exclaimed in shock. Yes, Bucho, he said earnestly as he closed the door behind him, alone with her in her bedroom. What are you doing here? She stammered, trying to process the situation, but failing badly. It was a characteristic of the devil race, that they were never particularly quick when adapting to new situations, and Rias seemed to be especially bad at it at the moment. To be fair, Issei admitted, it was hard to think straight when one tried to process arousal and shock and the mortification of being busted at the same time. You called for me, quite loudly, I might add, Issei said, but still walking toward her despite her discomfort, something she failed to pay the appropriate attention while trying to come up with an answer to her challenge. Is everything okay? Yes, Rias said. I was testing you. Yes, I was testing you, to see whether you will react to an emergency, and you passed with flying colors. I will make sure to find you a reward. Really? Issei murmured, letting a bit of power slip, filling the room just enough to make her feel discomfort. You're not lying to me, are you, Bucho? Because I would hate to punish you again just because you neglected to tell me the truth, again. No, I'm not lying to you, she rapidly whispered, even waving one of her hands for emphasis, missing the way the covers slipped just a bit to reveal her naked breasts. Or maybe, she just didn't care, as she hadn't been very conscious about her nakedness unless Issei pulled it to a sexual context. Or maybe, since he busted her while she was playing with herself, the situation was already sexual in her mind. Regardless of the case, after teaching Akano her lesson, Issei was in the mood for a more drawn-out play. Is that so? He said with a wide smile. Excellent. Rias nodded. Is there's not anything else? She murmured, trying to kick him out as kindly as possible. Actually, there's, Issei answered, ignoring the subtext. He quickly climbed on the bed, lying next to Rias, but he stayed above the covers. Enjoying the way Rias had stiffened. I have just finished the training with Akano, and I decided it was best to report it immediately. You're right, Rias murmured, her interest peaking immediately at the mention of training. Understandable considering she had bet everything on Issei's rapid development potential. We have started with how to use magic, Issei said. I learned how to manipulate mana, and even cast a few simple spells. It was easier than I had expected. Really, do you want to demonstrate? Rias said. Sure. Point me something you don't care about in the room, and I'll do so, Issei said. Rias chuckled, feeling more comfortable now that the discussion had focused on Issei's development rather than what she had been doing before his arrival. Don't worry about it, you can pick whatever you want, everything in my room is extremely resistant against magic. No, I don't want to risk destroying something that's precious to you, Issei stated, which made Rias blush rather visibly, easily impressed with Issei's simple chivalry. Just how shitty was her devil peers for this simple gesture to come across gallant, Issei wondered. He had done quite a bit of research on devils, but it was either pertinent to real powerhouses, or a more general topic. The communication culture and entitlement in teenage devils was not exactly a priority for him. Oh okay. Rias stammered with a cute blush. But still, you're worrying for nothing. How about a bet? Then, Issei pounced immediately. Point something, and if I can damage it, you'll owe me a favor, the bigger the damage, the bigger the favor will be. And if you can't? Rias asked, intrigued. Then I'm going to do any training you require from me non-stop for the next month with no complaints, no matter how hard or painful, Issei offered, and Ria's eyes widened, no doubt imagining him in an extended training session with one of her brother's peerage members, and all the benefits it would generate for him. Deal, she gasped immediately, then pointed at a grandfather clock, which, incidentally, was the strongest item magically in the room with a large margin. It's a gift from the Phoenix family, and it's horribly gauche, Rias said, then smirked widely, and let her covers dip down just a bit. If you can damage it, I'm going to reward you in a personal way as well, she offered. Then I'm really pumped, Issei said even as he suddenly brought his sacred gear. He gathered some mana on his other palm, impressive for a beginner, but not nearly enough to damage an artifact at that caliber. How about if you give me a good luck kiss, Bucho? Issei said, and despite her blush, Rias nodded. Issei walked to her, and Rias leaned for a kiss, only for Issei to turn at the last moment and turn it into a proper kiss. Rias was surprised with his action, but not enough to struggle when his tongue pushed into her mouth, his tongue plundering mercilessly. Thanks, Bucho, he murmured with a smirk, looking down to enjoy the sight of her naked breasts, uncovered due to cover slipping away in their heated embrace. Then, he doubled the gathered magic 4 times in a row, turning the mana ball into a raging inferno with crackling lightning. Then, he let it fly, ignoring Ria's shocked gasp. The moment it connected, the grandfather cloak turned into ashes, but it just marked the wall behind it without damaging. Issei had calculated the required power well. And that's a win, Issei smirked as he let his sacred gear disappear, enjoying the expression of shock on Ria's face, with no little amount of joy upon seeing his sudden burst of power. The stronger he was, the easier it was for her to break her engagement. Now, it's for my reward, he added and took a step forward, only for Ria's expression to be replaced by realization. Before she could say, however, Akino's voice reached. Is everything okay, Bucho? She cried, clearly about to burst in. I'm going to hide, Issei offered before Rias could even realize how unnecessary his offer was. He was her pawn, and there was nothing improper with him being in her room, even when she was naked. However, once again Rias failed to react properly, and Issei slipped under the covers, lying directly between Ria's legs, her slit just inches away. Before Rias could solve it, Akino burst in, and Issei used the opportunity to cast a spell that would make it hard for Akino to notice anything irregular about the shape of the covers, including any possible movements. What happened? Akino asked while Issei grabbed Ria's thighs, letting his breath fall on her slit. And nothing, she muttered. I suddenly felt angry and destroyed a gift from the Phoenix family, Rias explained. Sorry to make you worry. Akino sighed. Huh. No worries then, Bucho. She stopped for a moment, then continued with a teasing tone. Did I interrupt you doing something naughty, Rias-chan? Akino asked, her tone suggesting all the assumptions she didn't bother to vocalize. And nothing. Just resting, Rias explained immediately, then changed the topic. How was training? Oh okay, Akino said. It was her turn to stammer. Issei noted with satisfaction even as he leaned forward and brushed Ria's entrance with his tongue, making her shuffle uncomfortably. He managed to get a hang of casting quite quickly, so we sparred for a while, Akino explained, keeping her tone suspiciously even. Of course, Rias was far too occupied with her own concerns to catch that. That's nice, Rias answered. We should make this a daily thing if he's developing that quickly, Rias said. Sure. I might teach him some advanced combat the next time, Akino answered. Her sudden passion suggested that she was yet to understand the power difference between them, and was probably rationalizing the ending as a fluke on her part. Of course, Issei had no problem fixing that particular misconception during their next training. His power curve until now hadn't raised any red flags, so there was no problem showing a steep curve going forward, he decided even as he put his finger on Ria's knob, circling gently. Excellent idea. Maybe we should come to watch you guys, Rias said, her tone hitched as she received a naughty treatment under the covers. No, Akino shouted, though Issei didn't know whether she wanted to keep her plans for the aftermath hidden, or she was afraid of losing once more, this time with an even rougher treatment. No, she continued with a softer tone. I don't want Issei-kun to feel self-conscious, Akino explained, and Issei barely held back from snorting in amusement, and only because his mouth was occupied with a much better job. Then, he decided to make Ria's challenge even bigger. Without a warning, he slipped a finger into her puckered hole, completely clean thanks to devil metabolism making the lower functions unnecessary. As you wish, Rias managed to say with a stiff tone, somehow managing to convert her yelp of pain into a sentence. Don't let me keep you. I'm sure you have a lot of preparations for your next class, Rias said. I do, Akino murmured vindictively as she turned and left the room. Her tone was burning with a wave of anger hot enough to scare Issei, if he had been a couple of orders of magnitude weaker, of course. Issei was amused by the lack of communication between two friends, each willing to keep its secret due to a combination of pride and trying to spare the other's feelings, unaware that they had already passed the crown of the peerage Issei, allowing him to play with them to his heart's content, which included stealing both their anal virginities in the same morning. The moment the door slammed, Rias pulled off the covers and looked at Issei. What are you doing? She exclaimed. Having my personal reward, Issei stated confidently even as he slipped 2 more fingers into her puckered hole, making her yelp in pain. Then, he leaned down and let his tongue dance over her clit, drowning her complaints with pleasure. Caught flat-footed, Rias failed to reach in time when he flipped her suddenly so she was lying face down, her beautiful booty raised for a perfect entry angle. So, Issei pressed his shaft against her puckered hole, enjoying the way it slid in despite Ria's shocked yelp. He did that because his research on devil virginity detection magic revealed that it only factored normal virginity as a parameter, uncaring of any other hole. So, Issei saw no problem with helping himself just a bit. Issei-kun, she gasped. Please, it hurts. Yes, Issei said in a matter-of-fact tone. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a favor, would it? He said as he spanked her generous booty, enjoying the ripples. Also, it reminded Rias their latest spanking game, silencing her rather effectively. Rias tried to open her mouth once more, but this time, Issei was ready. He grabbed her crimson hair and pulled, bringing her lips to a perfect angle for a kiss. A heated kiss with a lot of tongue was exactly what Rias needed to distract her while Issei drilled her back door, slowly making her get used to his monstrous shaft. As Issei drilled her mercilessly, the tension was quick to leave her body, easily replaced with arousal and passion. Her resistance had lasted even shorter than Akino, which hadn't been a particularly impressive resistance in the first place. So, Rias-chan, Issei asked with an amused tone after 5 minutes of non-stop drilling. Do you still want me to stop? No, came the emphatic reply. At the same time Issei noticed a flare of light on her desk, signaling the arrival of a letter, one that had the sigil of the Citri family. Issei felt intrigued, so he pulled out, which made Rias give a desperate cry, but she followed as obedient as a ragdoll when he dragged her along on his walk to her desk, pushed her naked tits against her hardwood, her ass present for his attention. He plunged once again, even though he felt a small pity that some of her parts were still inaccessible, but luckily, her ass was more than sufficient as a consolation prize. Then, Issei grabbed the letter and opened it without even asking for Ria's permission, another not so subtle play on her control. Upon invading the privacy of a king like that was a crime bad enough to receive a death penalty, but all Rias could let out was a soft whine, which was soon replaced by an apology when Issei spanked her once more. Sona is asking for a deal about a visit to a place called the Familiar Forest, Issei explained. Apparently, she wants to visit as well. I reserved a visit first, Rias explained, though her tone was rather stiff considering the way Issei was impaling her repeatedly. She can't have it, she added, still managing to sound petulant despite all. Don't be rude, Issei said, while spanking her once more. I'll go talk to her, to see whether we can come with a deal, Issei explained, then continued with a mocking tone. If that's okay with you, of course. Rias was not in a mood to catch his mocking tone, or really argue against his words, not when he was enjoying her asshole for the first time, and rather roughly. Not as rough as he treated Akino, but rough nonetheless. Thank you, Issei-kun, she moaned. Excellent idea, Issei said. You're a good king, Rias-chan, he said, timing it perfectly with his explosion, filling her with his seed at the same time, making Rias shudder helplessly. Rias let out a relaxed but disappointed gasp when Issei finally pulled out of her, only for it to be replaced by another moan when Issei pushed her on the floor, and took her on the carpet once again. Issei had decided that being taken on the carpet like a 2-bit whore was a good way to make her payback for the ploy on his life. The fact that it had no risk of harming Issei was not important, or the fact that Issei was aware of it the whole time. It was the principle of the matter. As he plunged in Rias, He wondered whether all high-class devils were as easy as Akino and Rias. Luckily, he had a chance to test his assumption with Sona. That's all for today. Have a good day and Saya.